I just remember Shepherding. Why did you go to the Greek philosopher over the Beis Yehuda? Don't know why the Beis Yehuda was in there, but
Who's the Greek philosopher?
Makes you really, yeah, for sure.
Who's the Greek philosopher?
oh, I don't know.
Oh, okay. So we are now up to Daf Kafam is based on the bottom. Today's broadcast is sponsored. The whole week's broadcast is sponsored by Duvi Menzelowski and family, Le'ilul Nishmas, Duvi's mother, Chaya Bas, Reb Chaim Baruch Menzelowski, and her yahrzeit is today, Chav Hey Adar Beis, Aleh Shalom, and also Duvi's sister, Leah Sima Bas Ruvain Lowy, which was her last name, and her yahrzeit was Chav Tes Adar Beis, which was Erev Shabbos, Tehei Nishmasam Tzura B'Tzara Chaim, and they should continue to be a Militza Yosher on the whole Menzelowski family and the whole Aguda family. And then we should bring a lot of nachas to them.
Right.
As he does. Okay. Zok the Heilige Gemara. So yesterday, we learned about why when there's a Mokum Loisasa, why don't you say Asay Doicha Loisasa if there's an Isser Lav, such as a Koyin Gadol to an Almana. The Gemara first started off by suggesting that even though normally you would say Asay Doicha Loisasa, but there's a pasuk that says that there's no mitzvah of Yibum when there's a Loisasa involved, and it's a unique case where only Chalitza is the path forward. The problem with that, the Gemara asked, is that we've shown that if the Bia of Yibum is done, even though there's a lab, the Brashis said in Balukanu. So clearly there is a track of Yibum. So we need to know why is it that Yibum is not done when there's a lav involved. And the Gemara ended up answering Zeir Bia Rishayna Atu Bia Shnia. And we peeked at Toisus, and Toisus told us that the Hara, even the Tchilas Bia, that's what is the mitzvah, and therefore you wouldn't even be able to do the Gemar Bia. So Toisus says it could have said Zeir Tchilas Bia Atu Soif Bia. And we were nispal by the fact that the mitzvah of Yibum is not dafka abiyah that could lead to having a child, because through hara you cannot have a child. Yet that's the mitzvah, and that's what was amazing yesterday. So I did some homework yesterday, and I found out a couple of very interesting things. First of all, Tosfos asks, I don't understand this whole idea of Zeir Bir Rishayna, ought to be a shnia. How does that work? In every case of Yibum, the Bir Rishayna is the mitzvah of Yibum. The Bir Shnia, why should that be mutter? Why should that be mutter in a regular case of Yibum? There's already an Isra Eshuzach, and the mitzvah of Yibum was already fulfilled with the Bir Rishayna. The teretz is, Zok Tosfos, when the first Bia is done 100% kehalacha, and there's even a tzad to say that we're not even using the theory of a Seidoi Chaloisaseh, when it's only Eshuzach. Because like we once learned at the beginning of the Masechta, when we were probing, how do you know that a say is Doich HaLoisus or Yesh Bekaris, Tosfos asked, why don't you bring the Raya from Yibum alone? Yibum is a case of a say, Doich HaLoisus or Yesh Bekaris. And Tosfos answers, the reason why you don't have a Raya from there is because it's impossible to do the mitzvah of Yibum ever when you're not being Doich HaLei mitzvah Shusach. The rule of a say, Doich HaLoisus is only if this assay could be mekuyim in many occasions. Once in a while, it comes into contrast with a loisaseh, so then you need to invoke assay doich loisaseh. But if, by definition, the assay is being doich loisaseh, such as Yibum only comes b'mokim eishesach. If that happens, then that's not assay doich loisaseh. That's a Kodesh Baruch Hu suspending the assay completely. And I didn't have milk. I'll say this better. Thank you very, very much. So that's not even the assay doich loisaseh. So therefore, we can extend that to this Tosfos over here, that when the mitzvah is done properly and there's no other lavin involved, that's not even using a Seidoi Chaloisaseh. And therefore, the B is mutter and guns. There's also, of course, a svara of the Acheh Da'achei Noyim, some Rishonim throw in, that there's no way HaKadosh Baruch Hu would give a mitzvah to require only the Bia Rishina and then force them to get divorced. That's not the Rechad Achinayim. Our Shaila here is Gzer Bia Rishina Bia Shnia is when there's another lav involved. When there's another lav involved, that's when you won't say that you continue. However, the Ritva actually argues in Tosfos and says that even though the Hara is done, you're still allowed to do the rest of the Bia. Why? Because he splits it up. He says that the kinyan of the Yevama, when she becomes his wife and when he is konya the estate of his brother, that occurs at the Hara. But the mitzvah to be Mekayim Yibum doesn't happen until the Gemar Bia, because you need a Bia that's Mazriya, which is what we were all thinking yesterday. So the Ritva agrees with us. And the Ritva says, in fact, the whole Bia Rishon, he argues with us. The whole Bia Rishon is part of the mitzvah. All that's accomplished during the Hara is the kinyan of the Yibum, which means he's calling her as a wife, and he gets his brother's estate. But the mitzvah of Yibum only occurs at the end of the Bia. So that gives us a little bit more information to make it a little bit better to understand. Okay. Zok the Heilige Gemara. Itmar. Bias Kain Gadol Balmana. Right, and Tosfos brings up another point. What happens if a Kohen does Yibum? So that means the Kohen married an Almana. There's nothing wrong with that because a Kohen Hedget is allowed to marry an Almana. But what happens if he then becomes a Kohen Gadol? So do you make him divorce his wife? Avad or not? You say Kivun the Hutra Hutra. Because again, if the Yibum was done, if the marriage was done 100% Kalacha, we never say that I'll have to divorce his wife after the fact.
Also,
I'm not sure if that's the svara that Tosfos brings down, but it definitely makes sense that should be part of the svara. I think Tosfos thinks if the Yibum was done beheter, if the marriage was done beheter, we never retroactively remove it. Nobody will want to become a Kohen Gadol. Well, if he doesn't have no, so then they'll only pick Kohen Gadol who don't have brothers.
No.
If they don't have a brother, then she won't mind because there's no chance that there'll be Nisr.
No, the Kohen has an almana. All you need is there's no clause in that thing with an almana.
Where is that Darkei Noam pasuk?
Where does it say the Cheder Chanayim? I think it's right before Musaf. Not sure.
Okay.
I'll have to look at the Art Scroll Siddur always tells you where every pasuk is. So today, today's Monday, we're going to say it again.
It strikes me it's a nach pasuk. It's so it's doesn't have the same.
That's how the Torah is structured.
It wouldn't have, but it wouldn't have the same authority as if something is in the Chamisha Chumshei Torah.
It's not a mitzvah per se. It's just telling us the theory of how the Torah works.
Right.
Justification for making a mikvah hot.
Okay. So let's see the Gemara Vayter. Itmar. We have part of our daf is a little gadtish, but part of it is it could be relatively confusing, but we're going to try to keep it simple. So let's see the Gemara. Itmar. Bias Kohen Gadol b'almana. What if the Kohen Gadol unlawfully did Yibum with an almana? I mean, it's only you cannot do Yibum without an almana. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Elazar. There's a machlokes Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Elazar. Chadamer eina poiteres tzarasa. It would not pater her tzara, which would indicate that she's fine. Rashi says something that departs from what the other Rishonim say, and Rashi is the last Rashi on David. Poiteres oisa be'es tzarasa menachalita b'sat labaget. So Rashi seems to indicate that the question is, even if this Yibum accomplished its job, if the Yibum was done by Yisr, does the Yibum accomplish its job? The Chad Amar Pateres Terasa. Once the Yibum was done, even on woman A, by Yisr, it patters everybody, and therefore even the Almana's Tzara does not require Chalitza. Zok to Gemara. Be'almana min anasuin. If this Almana is also a Be'ula, she had relations with her first husband. So there's a say and a loy say, because it says who isha b'psula yikach kula alma loy pligi the loy patra. Everybody agrees that the yibum doesn't work. The ein asay doicha loy sesev asay. So it's not pshat he did the yibum ba'avera. A yibum ba'avera is not considered a proper yibum. He pligi ba'almana min ha'erison. his brother had made kedushin were not erison, so she was a psula, but she was still considered an almana. So there's only the lav here. Mandamar poiteres, the mandamar holds that the yibum is good. It's because asiyasei v'dachias loisasei. Umandamar ena poiteres, it's because it's loy asiyasei v'dachias loisasei. Why not? Kivan the after bechalitza, since it could be done with chalitza. So this is also a very big question here, because we always want to measure up chalitza and yibum. What is the mitzvah of yibum have an option A or B, or is the main thing to do the mitzvah of yibum? And if you can't, you do the chalitza. So I'm going to get into that a little bit later, but that's what the Gemara says over here. Basically, it says in Balu Kami. So we had riots that if there's an Isser Lav prohibiting the Yibum, and the Yibum is done in violation of the Lav, the Kinyan works, right? We had the Brisa several times yesterday. So Tiyufta, you have a pure Raya against the Mandamar who held that the other Torah needs Chalitza, because in fact, the Yibum, even the Isser, is 100% effective. For the Gemara, we had a theory yesterday from a Shlokish. Maybe this should also be an upslug on the theory of Rish Lakish. Layman Nami to have it Yukta the Rish Lakish, because Rish Lakish told us a general rule all over the Torah that whenever you can find a way to be Mekayim the Asay without being over the Loisaseh, there you don't even say Asay Decha Loisaseh. But here, where there was an option to do Chalitza, and someone did the Yibam anyway, the Brisa says in Balukanu. So this should be a Raya against Rish Lakish. No, from Yibum you don't have a raya that I'm wrong. Because Kiyamina Ana, when do I say that if you can do the mitzvah through a different way without violating the loisaseh, that there you don't say, that's Heichad the Mekayim mitzvah. That's when you're actually being the Mekayim, the mitzvah that you want to be Mekayim. Aval Hacha, Chalitza b'Makam Yibum, Lav Mitzvahi. Chalitza b'Makam Yibum is not a mitzvah. So Rish Lakish is clearly telling us that it's not A or B, it's A. It's like a nasei hanitik lasei. That's what some Rishonim say. It's like asei hanitik lasei. The mitzvah is to do yibum. If you don't do yibum, do chalitza. It's like don't steal. If you steal, then give it back. So if it's an asei hanitik lasei, so to speak, then chalitza is not even the mitzvah at all. The mitzvah is yibum. And there are some achronim who tell us that yibum is a mitzvah of eskarvis. You're being mekarev somebody. Chalitza is pushing somebody away. Avada, the mitzvah of eskarvis, that's the mitzvah, not pushing somebody away. But even more fascinating of the chalitza v'akabikim is not a mitzvah. Is an interesting shayla which Rabbi Chanan thinks about. And what's the halacha? We know the halacha is that a mitzvah to say, how much of your money are you mechuyev to spend to be mekayim a mitzvah to say? 20%, right? There's al Yevamos Yosy mechayim, right? But how much money do you have to spend to avoid doing an Issa Loisha? Everything. So what happens if you have an assay that's up against a Loisha? For instance, we have a mitzvah to eat matzah. You're not mechuyev to spend more than 20% of your income on the mitzvah of eating matzah, right? But what if you have matzah, but the matzah is chadash? So there's a Loisha set to eat it, right? So are you mechuyev now to spend all the money in the world? If you're going to have to spend way more, you have to pay double. The matzah that's yoshad will be double the cost. It's only one day away. The matzah that's yoshad is double the price of the matzah that's chadash. So now the question is, to save yourself from a loisas, you have to spend as much money as possible. But in the kaim and mitzvah say, you only have to add 20%. So you might say, I don't have to spend more money to be mekayim this I say because it's only 20%. Or maybe if I care, maybe you have to eat the matzah, but you have to spend all the money in the world to avoid being over the Isser of Chodesh. So there's an interesting shaila when you're putting an assay against the lois assay, how that works. How that say is like a lois assay.
You have to go according to the lois assay because you can't avoid it. By eating the chodesh, you're not going to. You can't avoid eating the. So maybe you're not mechuyev to spend more than 20% to do your mitzvah, and if you're going to spend an unlimited amount of money or a lot of money to buy chodesh, so then you can't afford the assay anymore. Or maybe so then is that called that you can't be yoyed to the assay unless you violate the loisa? So maybe then you're allowed to do it. So that's the shayla when
when you put these two things up against each other and you see how they hold out, that's when interesting. So that's the Rabbi Chon declares about that.
He's still cleric, I guess.
Yosy, I just looked this up, the Darkenom. Apparently it's in Mishle. So that's Shlomo HaMelech. So for 400 years, they didn't have this idea of Darkenom.
That's what I was saying. I don't know if that's true. The Torah was always built with Darkenom. Shlomo HaMelech told us about it, but they always knew about it before. Shlomo HaMelech put it in print. Shlomo HaMelech was discussing the ways of the Torah, but the ways of the Torah were always that way even before Shlomo was discussing it.
Yeah, but so they were familiar with that concept?
Yes. They must have been, because otherwise, what if a situation came up before then, right?
That's right.
So they must be familiar with it, and the Shlomo discusses it. It's like every morning they say, if you're reading it, it's history.
But you would expect that to be in the Chamishe Chumshe Torah if you want to make a drasha with it.
In the Chanamim.
A lot of times they say that Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to write things, and the Shefer said, put up a stop sign and said, you got to save it for other people.
So you understand for Shlomo HaMelech?
Yeah.
Okay. We're gonna soon see that Gzeirus, Shniyos, were saved for Shlomo HaMelech. So we'll see that soon. I want to ask you another question. What if a woman is 95 years old and she loses her husband, they have no children, and she has no intention of marrying anymore? She's done. Does she need chalitza? Does she need chalitza? So there's actually a shaila. There are certain mitzvahs that are a mitzvah kiyum. She mechuyev to buy a lulav and esrog and shake, right?
Wouldn't that be the same as an islandess?
Lav dafka. That's a different shaila. But I know. Let's say she was a young woman, but she had no intention of getting married.
She's 95.
What if she was a young woman? She could have a child, but she didn't want to have any more.
Okay, you said 95.
She didn't want to get married. Does she have to have it? So is it like shchita? There's no much to run around checking animals. If you want to eat, then you have to check the animal. Or is it a mitzvah like lulav and esrog, where no, you have to buy a lulav and esrog to shake it? That's the shaila about chalitza.
But the mitzvah of Eden is not on her that she didn't have children. The mitzvah of Eden is on him because he didn't have kindle.
Well, he's dead.
He's dead, and he didn't have kindle. So we have a mitzvah.
So who has to do it?
No, so we have a mitzvah to make.
So you think she has no chiv at all to participate? She does, like she's somewhat involved, She is somebody involved. You can't take her out of the equation.
The women don't have mitzvahs kedushin. The mitzvah of kedushin is not on the woman, right? It's not a mitzvah for a woman to.
But Allah is that Yibam is Balkar. We know that, right? But chalitza is lav dafka. Chalitza is lav dafka. And there are those who paskin that a woman who is not interested in getting married does not need chalitza. So there are those who learn that Yibam is a mitzvah. Chalitza is a ptur. Chalitza is a release. I'm not sure the word for it. So chalitza is the ptur. Yibam is the mitzvah.
He wants to make Yibam, or he wants to make chalitza. She
doesn't have to.
What about Yibam?
But the point is, that's where Shlokish is svar. Where Shlokish is svar is that the ikar mitzvah is Yibam, and therefore you don't say b'mokim chai v'lavin. You wouldn't necessarily say b'mokim chai v'lavin. This is considered. I could have done the mitzvah a different way. You could only do mitzvah Yibam by doing the mitzvah Yibam.
I thought you said
Yibam is right.
Which means that if she doesn't want to do Yibam,
she could be forced.
She is forced.
Yeah. I'm not sure how the derech erdach fits in over there.
Well, it's the what's his name? It's like the Rambam. You hit her.
That's right, very funny.
That's the there.
That sounds like a Taliban. Zok Gemara weiter. Oh my Rava. Rava said. Rava said. Remez lishniyos min Torah minai. Where do you see in the Torah that there's isurim d'Rabbanan? So the first question is, why do you need to see in the Torah that there's isurim d'Rabbanan? What's wrong that the Rabbanan came along and made takanas? Right, like the famous corny joke. Why is it that you need isurim d'Rabbanan? It's so that we should have a safer Torah. The Torah should be safe. Safer Torah. Safer Torah, right? So that's one of the corny jokes they say. That's a Yankelev joke. Okay. So the question is, why do we need the rayas? So I heard Rabbi Elephant spoke out with somebody beautifully yesterday. He said, you're not allowed to restrict people from marrying other people because that's taken away from Puravu. Your version wants people to get married. Rabbi Moshe wanted to get married. So by you eliminating options and making the pool smaller, that's a big avla. So unless the Torah gave Chazal a license to do that, they absolutely would not be able to do that. Shenemar, because it says in the pasuk, "Ki es kol ha'to'evos ha'el asu anshe ha'aretz." This is, I believe, in Achei Moshe Kedoshim in the Parsha of Arayis. So at the end of the Parsha of Arayis, the Torah puts it all together and says all of these terrible to'evos is what the anshe ha'aretz do, and it's referring to the to'evos with the word el. Ha'el kashos. When he uses the word to'evos ha'el, these to'evos, that has a connotation of a very severe avera, which means there are some to'evos that are severe, mechlal, dikarakos, and there must be other to'evos that aren't so bad. These bad to'evos is what the people of Anshe are do. But vice versa, there's other to'evos that are not as severe. So the Torah is being meramis that there's something called Isurei Kedushin, Isur of marriage, Isur of zivug, midrabah. Umay mashma the el lishna the kosher. Where do you get that this el is a lashon of hard major violations? I believe it's in Yecheskel, and this pasuk is talking about the intruders took away our generals, our strong people, our leaders. So you see that the leaders, the strong people, the dominant people are referred to as el. Zok Gemara lema pliga derav Levi. Let's say that this Svar that el is a strong, lashon of strong, is arguing with Rabbi Levi. Don't Rabbi Levi. Kasha unchin shal midos yaser me unchin shal arayis. The Torah speaks about one's not allowed to have in dishonest weights and measures. A person's weights and measures have to be perfect. But the oynish for someone who's a crook and does have fake weights and measures, inaccurate weights and measures, the oynish for that is worse than the oynish of arayis. Why is that? Shezen nemar behem el. By Arayis, it only says Atayeva Israel, like the pasuk that we quoted. But when the Torah is talking about the Isser of having fake weights and measures, number one, Eila. So Eila is a strong lashon, and the Eila is a weak lashon. So for the Gemara, how could you say Eila is a strong lashon? Eila is a strong lashon. Eila would be the weak lashon. So Gemara, no. Eila is kasha. The lashon Eila means severe. The Eila is kasha ma'el. We're not trying to diminish the severity of Arayis. That's not what Rabbi Levi is doing. Rabbi Levi is trying to build up and show how uber severe the avera of having false weights and measures are. Straight to Gemara, Gabeirayis Nami Haksev Eila, but it also uses the pasuk Eila in Arayis as well. So why don't we say that it doesn't say El, it says Eila, which is even stronger. And Rashi says Mikol HaTa'eva is Ha'ela B'nichrisu. So that's the pasuk that Rashi quotes. If you have the Ner Mishpat Hashalom, you get the whole pasuk quoted. So Ahu Lamaute Midos Mikaris. The only reason why it says Ha'ela is to tell you that only these are b'nichrisu. Only the ta'eva is the isurim of arayis lead to karis, but the ta'eva of having false weights and measures, that does not lead to karis. So if it doesn't lead to karis, so how would you say arayis is less chomer than weights and measures if the oynish is much less? In what way are weights and measures more severe? Elamai chumrayu hani efshir b'seshuva hani loy efshir b'seshuva. You can do tshuva on arayis, but you can't do tshuva on weights and measures. This is itself is a bombshell of a comment. So let's see how Rashi describes it. Arayis you could do tshuva on, but you cannot do tshuva on the weights and measures. Zokt Rashi, it comes with a but. When can you do tshuva on arayis? Kozman shelahoyded mamzer. If there was no mamzer, then yifroi sheimena. You could separate yourself from the isser from the erva. V'yischarit, and you could do tshuva. You could have charata. Avol midos, but one who steals from the rabbim, someone who runs fake pricing in a store, so he's stealing from multitudes of people who he doesn't even know who he stole from. Goes to the rabbim, and he doesn't know how to pay it back. Correct, Rashi, is there not a solution for that as well? Let him give kiddush every week and give tikkun every morning, and then somehow he'll be able to pay back all those people. So Rashi says that's tshuva, but it's not the real way to tshuva to pay back. In other words, if you want to pay back for paying tikkun, you got to do it for the rest of your life, because he's not quite done yet. You got to do it for the rest of your life. So the Tosfos Rush bombs on Rashi and says, "How you talking? There's no such thing is that you can't do tshuva." even if someone was ball erba mamzer, even that you could do tshuva. But that's a tshuva, being the aver is there in front of you all the time. So it's a much harder tshuva to do, and that requires tshuva your whole life. So this takes us to a fascinating shayla that could blow our minds. Rabbi Yaakov Emden wrote Azat Tshuva. Rabbi Yaakov wrote Azat Tshuva. There was a woman who was noyefes, and she was chayv misa. So let's say she was an Eshes, she was an Efes, and she became pregnant, and she wanted an abortion. Because how could I do tshuva? She wanted to do tshuva, but how could I do tshuva if this mom is going to be here for the rest of my life? Rabbi Yaakov Emden was matter her to have an abortion, and the poskim went wild. What? It's not as easy. It's not quite as easy, right? So she wanted, and Rabbi Yaakov Emden was matter, and the poskim mamish went crazy about it. Well, one of Rabbi Yaakov Emden's taina is she's anyway a dead woman because she's mechuyev misa. So maybe it could be. So maybe the Vlad's not considered alive, but it's a bomba de ketshuva. It's a bomba de ketshuva. I don't know. I don't know the answers to this. I don't know the answers. Ask my cousin Baruch David.
It's above your pay grade.
Yeah, ask Baruch David because he.
I didn't know he had such a.
No, he dealt with Bacham and next shoulder or some issues. These things have come up. Okay, it's way above my pay scale. Zok to Gemara weiter.
I didn't know that he's got the growth.
Yeah. Zok to Gemara weiter. I'm talking about Bacham from Shir Shiva. Zok to Gemara weiter. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Mehacha. Rabbi Yehuda says we have a raya that Shnius Menatoyer is from the following pasuk. It says ve'izain vechiker, referring to Shlomo Melech. Ve'izain vechiker tikein mishalom harbe. Shlomo Melech, the wise man, listened and cleared, and he created many mishalom. Amar Abula, Amar Abelazar, koidim Shabbat Shlomo. Before Shlomo Melech came, hoisa Torah doima lechafifa shein laznaim. It was like a box, a basket that didn't have handles, so you couldn't really get the Torah well. Shlomo gave it ears. Ears means like a handle. There's a Russian, when you're learning about kalim, aznayim is one of the parts of a kalim that refers to a handle. But it's also, Torah Shabbat Peh is something that you're supposed to listen to. The Gzeres were Torah Shabbat Peh, so it also makes sense to use the word aznayim referring to that. It says, Par'eyu al taverboy. So Pasuk Pshat, that Pasuk is, it should be disgusting to you, you shouldn't go near it. However, Rashi explains, here's Darshan, that's Tigad Leyu. Build up the Aveira, make the Aveira big so that people will fear it and will not go near it. Or make Gzeres to expand the scope of the Aveira to keep people further away from the Aveira. Setei me olav out there. Root your way around it, don't go to the Aveira. Amar Bashi, Mashal Reb Oishia Lama David. A mashal to Reb Oishia saying is steer around the Aveira, don't go into the Aveira. Is la'adam mishamer pardes, a person who's watching a pardes, an orchard. Mishamer b'chutz, if he's on the outside of the pardes and watching this whole perimeter, kulay mishtamer, then the entire pardes will be washed. So you have to watch it from a distance, which refers to the harchakas that the rabbanans put upon us to stay away from their eyes. But mishamer b'fnim, if you're inside the pardes, well then shalafan of mishtamer, whatever is in front of you that you could see, will be protected. But if you're inside, it's inevitable that part of the pardes is behind you. So therefore, it's not a complete protection. Zok the Gemara of Rabbi Ashi Bedusi. Rabbi Ashi's muscle is not good because Rabbi Ashi is suggesting that it's not a complete protection. In fact, it's not a protection at all. Hasam shalafan of mi mishtamer. In Rabbi Ashi's muscle, at least the area of the orchard that's in front of you, you could see, and it's going to be protected. But hacha, someone who's in the arayis, Ilav shniyos, and it's not for shniyos, which keep him far away from even getting close to the arayis. Paga be'erev gufa, it's going to lead to a total collapse. It says in the pasuk, in the deraisa, ushmartim is mishmarti. So David Zolti was asking before, it's not in the Torah, it's ksuvim. So now the Gemara had a pasuk in the Torah that says the Rabbanans, and that causes even bigger problems because it says in the Torah ushmartim is mishmarti. And we darshan assume mishmeres l'mishmarti, make a harchaka. So if that's the case, if it's in the Torah, amalei abayler b'yosef hadaraisi. Now it's even worse because if we're trying to say it's the Rabbanon, now it's going to become a deraisa. So how is it a Rabbanon? So in fact, it's better if it's not in the Torah. Dr. Gemara, no, it's deraisa. The concept of shniyos is min Torah. What those shniyos should be, upirshu Rabbanon. Frank Gemara, the whole Torah is like that. Even the mitzvahs daraisas, we need the Rabbanon to clarify for us. We need Shas to tell us what the Torah means. Kol Nami, Pirshu Rabbanon. Ella, we have to say that midrabanan, the whole makar for shniyos for yisurim derabanan is midrabanan. Ukras machta ba'alma. The pasuk is just hinting towards that. But avada, it is not a mitzvah deraisa to make shniyos because then they're deraisas. Okay, now that we know there's a concept of shniyos, we're going to learn about what they are, and here is where it gets confusing. It's a shame that 6:32, but we're going to have to go through this, and I'll try to keep this as simple as possible. Taner Rabbanan. Mahem shniyos. What are the isurim of erba that are not also midaraisa, only midarabbanan? So aim imoy, and we're going to learn it doesn't just mean your mother's mother. So really, only your mother is also to you midaraisa. Your mother's mother, meaning your grandmother, is not also to midaraisa. That's only midarabbanan. And we're going to learn soon that this derabbanan, this particular derabbanan, never stops. It's not only your grandmother; it's as many grandmothers all the way up the line. The aim of it, and the mother of your father is also usher, the Ashes Avi of it, and the wife of your grandfather. The wife of your grandfather is an usher d'Rabbanan. The wife of your father is usher midaraisa, but the wife of your grandfather is usher mid'Rabbanan. The Ashes Avi Imai, so say your paternal grandfather and say your maternal grandfather, their wife is usher mid'Rabbanan. The Ashes Achia Avin. Now we know your brother's wife is usher to you, right? I'm sorry, your uncle's wife. Your uncle's wife is usher to you. But midaraisa, your uncle's wife is only usher to you if your uncle is your father's brother because they share a father. But if your uncle is your father's brother because they only share a mother, that is not usher midaraisa. That's only usher midarabana. The H is achei ha'av min ha'ein. Your uncle's wife, but your uncle is only your uncle because he shares a mother with your father. That's only usher midrabanan. The eish is achei ha'eim min ha'av. The halach is your mother's brother. I'm sorry, the wife of your mother's brother. The wife of your mother's brother is mutter to you. It's only usher midrabanan if it's your mother's brother from her father. But if it's your mother's brother from her mother, that's going to be discussed on Amud Beis. The Gemara's maskana is going to be that that's also midrabanan, but that's not in this list. In this list, it's only the father because there's a tzad av involved. Because really, the only isser, the Raisidic issue that everything that is hinged on is the fact that your uncle, who is your father's brother, and they share a father, right? That's the only one that's also midaraisa. But if we're going to extend that to your mother's brother, there has to be some element of father involved. So therefore, we only extend it to your mother's brother if it's your mother's brother because they share a father. But if they share a mother, that's too far from the original problem. So therefore, there might not be an Isser there. But in fact, the Gemara on number base will extend the Isser there as well. Okay? And then we have the Kalas Benoi, the daughter-in-law of your son. Your daughter-in-law, your son's wife, is also to you midaraisa. But your son's daughter-in-law is only also midaravanan. The Kalas Bitoi and the daughter-in-law of your daughter. Umuter Adam. You know, when we see Kalas Benoi, you may think, but it's on the Geya. There's people in the shir that Kalas Benoi is relevant because they already have married grandchildren. We're not there yet. So to us, it still seems like a distant. But Be'ez Hashem, we should get there. We should get to Kalas Ben Benoi. Umuter, and then we can be behind the mitzvah that we're not marrying them. Right? So we won't have it behind. Why do we want to live long? So we can have an opportunity to be behind more mitzvahs. Okay. Umuter Adam the Eshes Chama. A person is allowed to marry if his father-in-law remarries and has another wife other than his mother-in-law. You're allowed to marry his wife. Now, before you think, who would ever want to do that? We're about to learn a doozy story in Tosis. So it's mutter for a man to marry his father-in-law's wife. Okay. Ube'eshes chargoy. If he marries a woman and this woman comes into the marriage with a child, right? So a person marries a woman, and this woman comes into the marriage with a child. So this is his stepson. If his stepson gets married, and then he divorces his wife, he's allowed to marry the ex-wife or the widow of his stepson. The Osir Bavas Chargoy, but he's not allowed to marry the daughter of his stepson because that's the granddaughter of his wife. So that would be Osir Midaraisa. right? V'chargoi muter be'ishtoi. If he had another wife besides the wife who brought in his stepson could marry his other wife if he divorces his other wife or if he dies. Ubitoi, and his stepson could marry his daughter. So this is the Brady Bunch, right? If he marries and he brings his children into the marriage, and she marries and she brings her children into the marriage, the step siblings are allowed to marry one another. Okay? The Ashes, yeah, in the comments, it's exactly the case, right? The Ashes Chargoi, and he's allowed to marry the wife of his son-in-law. I'm sorry, that's a new thing. So I want to stop it before we get to here, even though we're running out of time, I can't resist from looking at this text. So we just said that umuter adam be'eshes cham. A person's allowed to marry the wife of his father-in-law. So we think, who wants to do that? So look at this text over here. Yerushalmi says that even though our Gemara says it's mutter, eshes cham of his osrim shumar sign, because people won't chop that this is not his mother-in-law, it's his father-in-law's wife. They won't chop that his father-in-law remarried. Al sign, we don't allow it. So he goes through, if there's a shot of Marashain, even with step siblings, maybe there's Marashain, they grew up in the same family. But I want to get down to a little bit later. So here's a Murdic story. Umaisa Provincia. There was a story in Provincia. Is that in Germany? Where's Provincia?
France.
Where's that?
Provence.
Provence, yeah.
It was already the afternoon of the wedding, and Kalman had already prepared the whole wedding. The sweet table was ready, and the badekin was ready, and the band was there, and the chopped eggs were already on the table with the tam-tams and the herring and the soda. Everything was ready to go.
And the Zoom was set up.
And he was planning to marry the wife of his father-in-law. The Afsidei Rabbeinu Tam Usudase. Rabbeinu Tam came and said, the wedding is off. Period. He shut the wedding down. The Afagav, the Shmaitin Shari Lahu Eishes Chama, the Chargoi, Shema Achakach Osrim. Maybe later on, after Talmud Bavli, there was a point where it was Nesar, Rabbeinu Tam shut it down. They shut down the wedding. This mama sounds like a COVID situation. They're about to get married, the police came in and shut the whole thing down. Okay, so that's the story I wanted to share. So you see, somebody actually was going to spend a lot of money to marry his father-in-law's wife. She must have been very wealthy.
No, she could have been very young.
What? Or maybe she was very young. Okay. Okay, talk to Gemara Vayter. So
he was very rich, and that's how he got himself a beauty.
Okay. The Aisha is Chargoi. The Aisha is Chargoi Oimeresloi. The Aisha is Chargoi Oimeresloi. The wife of his stepson, could tell him, Animu Tereslach. Believe it or not, I'm allowed to marry you, 100%. Nevertheless, Uviti, but my daughter Asurlach, my daughter is Osti Midaraisa, because my daughter is the granddaughter of your wife, right? Or Bas Chorgoi, Bas Chorgoi Dairaisi. Frank the Gemara, it's listing off here Shniois, and in the list it said Bas Chorgoi is Oshertim, so I would think that's part of the list. It's only Ashim Darabanan. But Bas Chorgoi, the daughter of his stepson, is also to a man midaraisa, because that's his wife's granddaughter. So how could the brisa list it off and sort of sneak it in amongst the list that are only supposed to be also midarabanan? Since the seifa of the brisa wanted to tell us this cutesy idea that Eishes Chargoi Omeres Loi Anu Mitaris Lach Ubiti Asur Lach, which we already discussed, since the brisa wanted to stick that cutesy thought in, so therefore the Af Agav the Biti Asulach Midaraisa, and even though my daughter, which is your wife's granddaughter, is also for you to marry Midaraisa, Bididi like Gaza Berabanan, on me, the Rabbanan didn't even make an issue of the Rabbanan. I'm completely mutter, yet my daughter is also Midaraisa. So since it wanted to say that, Tana Reishanami Bas Chargoi. That's why it listed off Bas Chargoi in this list, because the Brisa was going to make a point with that Bas Chargoi. Frank the Gemara, if that's the case, Eishes Chamav Nami, the wife of his father-in-law, this woman who Rabbeinu Tam broke up the wedding, let her also say, Tema, let her say, Aninu Tereslach, I would be mutter to you, but Ubiti Asurlach, my daughter would be usher to you. Why would her daughter be usher to her? Because her daughter that she had together with this husband would be usher, because she's a half sister to your wife, right? So she'd be usher also chosishtoi, Zaktimar Ein Chanami, it could have said that, but you know why I didn't say it? Because the granddaughter of your wife will always be usher to you no matter what. But the sister of your wife is only usher to you while your wife is alive. Once your wife is no longer alive, she's not usher to you. So therefore, the Brisa didn't want to say that case that my daughter would be usher to you because it's lavdafka. No sister is usher once the wife dies. That is, you're not allowed to marry two wives, two sisters, is only when they're both alive. But once your wife dies, once Rachel dies, Yaakov is allowed to be married to Leah. Right? Yaakov was married to Rachel and Leah. They came to Eretz Yisrael, Rachel died, because in Eretz Yisrael he kept the Torah. So in Eretz Yisrael, so the whole issue of Achos Ishtoi, one is only not allowed to be married to two sisters when they're both alive. If one of them is no longer alive, it's 100% mutter to marry one's wife's sister. Like we had the story, where is it, the Moed Katan we had, where someone by the Levi of his wife told the sister-in-law, maybe you want to marry me to take care of your sister's children. Right? After meets it's allowed. Okay, Zok the Gemara, it's already 6:42, and we're only on Amral. Okay. Amarav, Arba Noshim, Yesh Lahen Hefzer. All of the Derabanan that we discussed, remember I said, Imoy, Imoy, it goes on forever. The Xer goes on forever. In many generations it's necessary, but there's 4 women that are Asami Derabanan that we don't say that the Isser continues to the generations above. It actually is only for that generation. Which 4 are they? Dr. Gemara, Nokot Rav Biyadei, Rav was able to identify, Rav knew from somewhere that there's 4 women in the list that the Isser is only for that generation. It doesn't extend up to early generations, but Rav was only able to identify 3 of those. Nokot Rav Biyadei Tlas. And which were the 3? There was Eshes Achi Ha'em Minav. So this is the wife of your uncle. And how is it your uncle? It's your uncle because he is your mother's brother and they share a father. That does not go up any generations. The Eshes Achi Ha'av Minaim. And your uncle's wife who only shares a mother with your father. So those 2 items in the list above we mentioned are only midrabanan. So it's only that generation. It's not generations above everyone. Vichalosoi and his daughter-in-law. Now Vichalosoi right away is a problem. His daughter-in-law is not Asur Midrabanan. His daughter-in-law is Asur Midaraisa. So Rashi tells us that on Amud Beis, the Gemara is going to tell us that this means the daughter-in-law of his daughter, who was only Asur Midrabanan. So the daughter-in-law of his son, it does go multi-generational. But the daughter-in-law of his daughter is only that generation and not further. Uzeiri Moisef, and Zeiri added another item to the list of Kula, meaning that the Xer is only for that generation and not for others, is Af Eshes Avi Imoy, which means his grandfather's wife. His grandfather's wife, his maternal grandfather's wife. So we could always imagine that. My mother's father's wife, if she's not my mother's mother, right? So if my grandfather had 2 wives, so my mother's father's wife, my grandfather's wife, such a woman is also when it doesn't extend further. Amar Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak, v'simonech the Eloi the Rav. The simon of what Zeiri added was it's a generation above the people in the generation that Rav was talking about. Rav was talking about people in my parents' generation, my mother's brother, my father's brother. But Zeiri is talking about my grandfather's wife. So Zeiri is talking about 1 generation above what Rav was talking about. Frank the Gemara, but Rav, my time aloi choshavlei. Why does Rav not mention Zeiri's halacha that Eshes Avi Imai, my maternal grandfather's wife? How come Rav doesn't consider that it doesn't stop there? Zokt Gemara, because Rav had a problem and he held that even if it was your great grandfather and great grandfather and great 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 grandfather, it would still be a problem. Why? Because michlefalei the Eshes Avi Avi. The halacha is your father's wife is Asur Midrabanan, and that goes up as many generations up as you can go. Your father's, his wife is also Asur to you. So since all grandfathers are grandfather, you might not have the difference, and therefore Rav held that we have to extend the Isser on the mother's side as well on the mother. Uzeiri, Hakam Uzeiri didn't have that problem, and this is a fascinating comment because lahasam shchiach v'azal, a person hangs out by his grandparents as many generations back from his father's side. But people don't hang out by their previous generations, by their mother's side. I guess that's how it was in those days. The only reason why I would think this makes sense is because in the olden days, before they had communication and transportation, you usually would move to the city of your husband, and then you would practically never see the other side again. So Mamela, there was no reason to make such a xer. That's my own boichs for it. I don't know if that's true, but how else could you explain it? Right? Zok Gemara, Kalosai, one of the items listed in this brisa as a drabanan. I'm sorry? That's right. It depends who's paying the bill, really. Right? So fact Gemara, Kalosai, one of the items mentioned in the brisa as a woman who's also midrabanan was a daughter-in-law. But that's not true. Kalosai deraisi. It's a meforsha pasuk that one may not marry his daughter-in-law. Dichsiv ervas kaloscha loy segale. Zakta Gemara, Ema, let's say that when it says kalasa in the brisa as being asher midrabanan, it means kalas benoy. Freit Gemara, how could you say kalas benoy? The kalas benoy yesh lahefsek. Rav said that the rabbanon of kalasai is only that generation; it doesn't continue. But that's not true. But Tanya kalasai erva kalos benoy is a shniya. The kala of his son is asher midrabanan, and that continues even multiple generations. His great grandson, if that great grandson has a daughter-in-law, that's also to him. We should all be zoichet to see that. So we need to find an Isser Kalosai that it's only one generation and doesn't extend to multiple generations. The daughter-in-law of his daughter, that's also to him. But the daughter-in-law of his granddaughter, meaning his daughter's daughter, there would be no Isser even midrabanan. Don Rab Chisda, because Rab Chisda said, Homilsa, this halacha as to why we aser kalas bitoy is migava rabba shmiel. I heard the reason for it from a great man. Umani, who's the great man who I heard pshat in why kalas bitoy is aser? I heard it from Abami. He was the great man, and this is what he said. It was a very cryptic explanation. He said, like asru kala ella mipnei kala. They only asked the kala because of kala. They only asked a daughter-in-law because of a daughter-in-law. Now, this is a very cryptic message. What does it mean? However, he shares with us an experience he had in his youth. Well, Amali Kaldoi, I was once told by a stargazer, Melafna Havis, you're going to be a Melafna. Melafna could either mean a teacher or it could mean a great wise scholar. So Amina, I didn't know what it meant. If it means I'm going to be a great scholar, then Asbar Midaiti, then I'll be able to explain the cryptic message of Rabbi on my own. I'll be able to figure it out. But if what it means is that I'll be a teacher, but not necessarily a great scholar, so then then I'm going to have to ask someone in the Bismedrish to explain to me the pshat. So the question is, how can you reckon with stargazers? It's not a Jewish thing. So the Achronim talk about it, and they say that you're not allowed to go ask a stargazer. But if you're walking down the street and the stargazer tells you something, that's not a problem of Tamam Tia and Hashem Elokach. So anyway, so Hashta Svarasta Midaiti, I figured it out on my own. So it must be that I'm going to be the Chacham myself. And what did I figure out? The only reason why they asked the daughter-in-law of my daughter, Elim Shem Kalas B'nai, is only because we know that the daughter-in-law of my son is Asher B'Drabanan, and since the daughter-in-law of my daughter is similar to the daughter-in-law of my son, they asked that as well. Amr le Abaye l'Rava, and Abaye told Rava, let me explain to you why you could mix them up. Because we said in the grandparents you don't mix up, but the grandchildren you can mix them. Asberlach Kagoyin, and whenever I learn this Gemara, I think of what Pesach and Sukkot looks like in our beautiful Bismedrish, where you have people with son-in-laws and sons. So we don't get to see it because we see the menstrual, we see the son-in-laws and the sons. But if you're davening in that Noshim, you see all the wonderful daughters and the wonderful daughters-in-law, right? So there, you see all these women, you don't know who's a daughter-in-law, and you see many daughters-in-law, but you don't know who's the daughter-in-law because she married your grandson, or who's the daughter-in-law because she married your grandson. But is it the grandson the daughter of your son, or is the grandson the daughter of your daughter? Right? So there's many things as we grow older, we have our grandparents and our grandchildren are getting married. Many of the girls in the Ezras Noshim married our daughters' sons, and many of these girls married our sons' sons, right? And they're all mixed together. And sure, we don't know who's who. So therefore, we have to ask for everybody. So Kagoin Kalta the Bay Bartisoi, the household of Bartisoi had a lot of grandchildren that were married. Some of them were the children of boys, some of them were the children of girls. Rapapa Amar, in his city, it was Kalsa the Bay Rapapa, Barabba. He had a big, beautiful family. Ravash Yomer, Kagoin Kalsa, Bay Mari Baris. Like I said, it's like Arbus Medish, all these different grandchildren come together. You don't know, is this an Einkel that you married your grandson who's the son of your daughter, or the son of or is the son of your son? You don't know. It's all mixed together. Everything else. Oh, give out. Yeah. So this was the question that we had before. We said in the list was meaning your mother's brother's wife, but your mother shares a father with this brother. What if your mother only shares a mother with this brother? Mahu, what would the halacha be? Do you say those are the two items that are mentioned in the Bryce Hanamad Aleph. The Ika Tzad Av. There's some connection to a father there. Who the goes Rabbanon, but if there's no father here involved at all, because it's my mother's brother from her mother, maybe there goes Rabbanon, maybe the Rabbanon didn't ask her. So Amar Rab Safra said, why would you ask her? Isn't that so remote? He gufak. The whole fact that I'm not allowed to marry the wife, my aunt, the wife of my father's brother from his mother, or the wife of my mother's brother from her father, even that's midrabanan. But nigzer gzera. How wide are you going to extend out this gzera? Amar Rabba, I don't understand why you have a problem with gzera. Kulu lav gzera. If you look at all the shniyos, many of them are gzeres l'gzeres. For instance, imay erva, a person's mother, that's the deraisa. Aim imay, the mother of his mother, is only midrabanan. The gozral aim mamalit, and then they ask her his father's mother, mishum aim imay, because it could get mixed up with his mother's mother. So you see, you make gzeres for gzeres when it comes to rise. The time of my lamai. So what is the reason why we do that? Is because kulu devei ima rapsi karila. They're all called babi. So everyone's babi. So remember, all babis are. The gzer was all babis should be also. Ashes of it erva. His father's wife is an erva. Ashes avi avi shniya. But the wife of your grandfather is only midarbanan. The gozru al ashes avi imoi mishum ashes avi avi. Again, they answered the wife of his maternal grandfather, just as they answered midarbanan, the wife of his paternal grandfather. The time of my kulu devei abarabba karile. It's all Zaidi's wife. So therefore, we can't make those distinctions. Okay? Ashes achaya av min ha'av. Ashes achaya av min ha'av, which is our subject here, right? Erva, it's an erva. Ashes achi av min ha'aim is a shniya. The gozral ashes achaya aim min ha'av, mishum ashes achaya av min ha'av. The time of my, why are we adding these gzeres? Mishum the chulu devei doidi karla. They're all bachi and nanis. They're all nanis and bachis. All bachis are also. All nanis are also. Right? So therefore, they could answer. Maybe they would answer that as well. So the Gemara needs. This is the Gemara Shaila. The Gemara now needs to be pushed to Shaila. Did they answer your uncle, who is your uncle's wife, and how is he your uncle? Because he's your mother's brother, but your mother only shares a mother with him. Would that be usher or not? Does a tzad say yes? Does a tzad say no? And stay tuned for tomorrow, where we will find the answer. Okay, Gavaltik. So it wasn't so complicated.
I think he wanted to make sure that his estate doesn't run away. That's why he wanted to marry his father.
I hear.